I never planned to tell this story. Not to my friends, not to my family, and definitely not to the people in my small town who still whisper about me whenever I walk past the diner on Main Street. But lately, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the revenge, the unexpected love that came after, has been pressing on me so hard that I feel like I'll suffocate if I don't let it out. So here it is. My confession, my truth, and maybe, in some twisted way, my closure. I was 24 when everything started to collapse. 24 and stupidly in love with the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. I won't waste words on her name. She doesn't deserve that. But I will say this. When you love someone that deeply, you don't imagine them sneaking around behind your back. You don't imagine them lying with the same mouth that once told you they couldn't live without you. And you definitely don't imagine catching them in your own damn house. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Late fall. Cold enough that the windows fogged up from the heater, warm enough that the air still carried the faint smell of pine from the forest behind our neighborhood. I had come home early from work, something I never did, something she never expected. I heard the voices before I even opened the bedroom door. Not arguments, not whispers, but laughter. Easy, comfortable, intimate. The kind of laughter that comes from two people who have been doing something they know they shouldn't, but can't bring themselves to stop. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I didn't even ask why. I just stood there long enough for them to see me, long enough for the panic to hit their faces, and then I walked out. People like to talk about heartbreak like it's sharp, like it cuts, like it hits all at once. But for me, it was dull, slow, heavy, a dead weight pressing into my ribs and lungs. Something I carried silently for weeks while the people in this tiny American town made the whole situation their entertainment. But grief does something to you. It changes shape. After a while, it stopped hurting and started burning. It stopped dragging me down and started pushing me forward. And that's when the idea of revenge began forming. Not the childish, get-even type, not a quick slap back, but something deeper, something precise. A psychological strike so clever and devastating that it would shake the foundation of the life she thought she still controlled. I didn't care about getting her back. I cared about making sure she could never pretend to be the innocent one, never twist the truth, never hide what she had done. But before all of that, before the planning, before the execution, before the moment everything exploded, something happened that I didn't expect. I met her, the woman who would change everything, the woman 10 years older than me, the woman who made me question whether revenge was enough or whether I wanted something more. I met her on a Sunday morning. The kind of morning when the whole town feels half asleep. The sun had barely risen, and Main Street was wrapped in that soft golden light that makes even old brick buildings look new. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't even looking for peace. I just needed coffee strong enough to burn through the fog in my head. That's when she walked in. She wasn't the kind of woman you forget. Not because she was loud or dramatic. Quite the opposite. She carried herself with this calm, grounded confidence that made the whole room shift around her. Her hair was tied up loosely, a few strands falling around her face, and she wore a simple gray sweater that somehow made her look like she stepped out of a magazine without trying. She ordered tea. Not coffee, tea. I remember thinking only someone older, someone experienced, someone who had lived a life before mine, would choose tea at 7 in the morning in a town full of caffeine addicts. The cafe was nearly empty, and she noticed me staring. Instead of looking away or pretending she didn't see, she gave me a small, knowing smile. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. The kind that says, I see you. Whoever you are, whatever you're carrying, I see it. I looked down immediately, embarrassed. The last thing I needed was another woman reading me like an open book. But she didn't leave it there. A minute later, she walked past my table, slowly, and said, rough night? Or rough month? Her voice was low, steady, and warm. It didn't have that fake pity tone people use when they've heard rumors. It felt genuine. I should have shut her out. I should have ignored her. I should have kept to myself, especially after what I'd gone through. But something about her presence disarmed me. Rough year, I muttered. She smiled again, this time softer. Mind if I sit? I hesitated. I hadn't let anyone close since the betrayal. My ex had taken more than love from me. She'd taken trust, confidence, any sense that people could be what they claimed. But something in me whispered, let her. So I nodded. She sat across from me, placed her tea on the table, and waited, not with impatience, not with forced interest, but with the kind of stillness only someone who has lived enough life to understand silence. "I'm Elena," she said. The name matched her. Elegant, mature, a little mysterious. I told her mine. We talked about nothing at first. The weather, the town, the coffee that tasted like burnt toast. But every minute felt strangely easy. She spoke like someone who didn't need to impress anyone. She listened like someone who genuinely cared. And for the first time in months, the weight in my chest loosened just a little. I didn't know it then, but that simple conversation would spiral into a connection that would shake every part of my life. My healing, my anger, my revenge, my future. And it all started with a cup of tea and a woman 10 years older who seemed to see straight through me. Elena and I didn't exchange numbers that morning. She didn't push, and I didn't ask. It felt like one of those rare moments you're afraid to disturb. Like if you try to hold on to it too tightly, it'll crumble in your hands. So we just parted ways. She left with her tea. I stayed with my coffee and the faintest sense of clarity I'd felt in months. But the universe in small towns has a strange way of putting people back in your path. 3 days later, I saw her again, this time at the local grocery store. I was standing in front of the soup aisle, trapped in an internal battle about whether a grown man should keep living on instant ramen, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You look like you're debating philosophy, not dinner." I turned, and there she was, Elena. Hair down this time. A leather jacket. Jeans. Effortlessly put together in a way that made me feel like a college kid next to her, even though I wasn't that much younger. 10 years. A decade. But next to her, it felt like more. "You caught me," I said. "Hard decisions." She glanced into my basket, ramen, chips, energy drinks, and raised an eyebrow. "You know this isn't food, right?" "Debatable," I replied. She laughed. A full, warm, genuine laugh that made something in my chest unclench again. We walked together as she shopped. Well, properly shopped, unlike me. Vegetables, actual ingredients, things that required pans and effort. She gave casual cooking tips, told small pieces of her past, nothing too deep. Divorced. Moved to town a couple years ago. Works remotely, something to do with design. Calm, private, steady. And for some reason, she pulled stories out of me without trying. I told her about work, growing up here, the people in town who never mind their business. But I didn't mention the betrayal. I wasn't ready. Not until we reached the checkout. A familiar voice appeared behind us. One I never wanted to hear again. My ex. Her surprised gasp, her frozen expression, the way her eyes flicked between me and Elena, it all hit at once. Like a small explosion. "Elena," my ex said tightly, "you're here." Elena turned to me with a subtle, questioning look. She didn't know. She couldn't have known. "Do you two know each other?" I asked. My ex swallowed. "We work together." Sort of. Lie. I could hear it instantly. Elena didn't react outwardly. She just studied my ex quietly, taking in her tension, her nervous glances, the way guilt practically radiated off her. It felt like watching a wolf scent blood. We left the store together, and once we stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, Elena looked at me and said, "That wasn't just an awkward run-in. You don't have to tell me everything. But something's there." I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was her calm voice, or her sharp intuition, or the way she didn't push, just opened a door. But the words slipped out before I could stop them. She cheated on me, and she's been lying to everyone since. Elena didn't gasp or give me pity. She just nodded, slow and understanding. "That explains the storm behind your eyes," she said softly, and why she looked like she saw a ghost. Silence hung between us, not cold, not heavy, just honest. Then she added something that sent a shiver through me. "If she hurt you that badly, don't let her rewrite the story. People like her always try." She didn't know it, but that sentence aligned perfectly with the plan that had begun forming in my head. The plan to make sure my ex could never twist the truth again. And Elena, without even meaning to, had just pushed it one step closer. After that day, something shifted between Elena and me. It wasn't romantic yet. It wasn't even flirtation. It felt more like a quiet thread connecting us, thin but real. She didn't treat me like a wounded kid or a broken man. She treated me like someone capable of standing up again, even if I wasn't sure I believed it myself. But the encounter with my ex stirred everything back up. The humiliation, the rage, the fire I'd been holding down. Seeing her face twist when she realized I wasn't alone, It lit something inside me I couldn't ignore anymore. The plan I'd been crafting in the back of my mind started taking shape, and every step of it was designed to cut where it hurt most. Her reputation, her lies, her carefully curated image in this small town. But that plan wasn't ready yet. Not fully. Revenge has stages. Patience. Precision. And I needed to rebuild myself first, to become someone she couldn't manipulate, someone she couldn't dismiss, someone she would fear losing control over. Elena, unknowingly, became a part of that rebuilding. A week after the grocery store moment, she texted me out of the blue. "You still eating ramen for dinner?" I stared at the message for a full minute, then laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "Maybe. Unacceptable. Come over. I'm cooking." There was no flirt in her tone, no expectations, just kindness with a backbone. Her home was on the quiet end of town, a small renovated craftsman house with warm lighting and plants she somehow kept alive. She cooked like she lived, calmly, confidently, with small, deliberate movements. She taught me how to chop onions properly, how to season chicken, how to taste instead of guess. It shouldn't have meant much, but it did. It made me feel human again. We talked while we cooked. I told her more, about the betrayal, about how my ex had spread rumors implying I was the problem, how she always played the victim. Elena listened deeply, but she never asked invasive questions. She had this uncanny ability to let me lead the pace of the conversation. At some point, she said softly, "People like your ex, they rely on silence. On your silence. If you don't speak the truth, they fill the gaps with lies." Her words landed hard. It was like she saw straight through the mask I'd been wearing. After dinner, we sat on her couch with tea, her ritual, and she asked, "Do you want to get past this? Or do you want to get even first?" I didn't sugarcoat it. Both. She didn't scold me. She didn't lecture me on morality. She simply nodded, like she understood more than I realized. But then she added something dangerous, something electrifying. "There's a right way to do it, and a wrong way. If you're going to strike, make sure it's not impulsive. Make sure she exposes herself. People like her always do." At that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. Elena wasn't just older. She wasn't just wiser. She wasn't just grounding. She had seen darkness too. She knew betrayal. She knew strategy. And she knew exactly how people collapsed under the weight of their own lies. Sitting there with her, sipping tea, I had no idea she would soon become a key part of the revenge I thought I was planning alone, or that she had secrets of her own that would make everything far more complicated. The more time I spent with Elena, the more I realized she wasn't just good at listening. She was good at reading people. I don't mean casual intuition. I mean truly seeing beneath the surface. She could dissect someone's intentions with frightening accuracy, and when she did, her whole demeanor shifted into something sharp, analytical, almost strategic. I didn't fully understand why she was like that yet, but I would. 2 weeks passed. We kept meeting, sometimes by accident, sometimes because one of us sent a simple "you free" message. I found myself drawn to her steadiness, her maturity, the way she looked at me like she wasn't intimidated by my pain or my anger, like she respected both. One evening, we were walking through the quiet downtown streets after dinner. Christmas lights were already up even though it wasn't December yet. Our town loved decorating early. The sidewalks were empty, and the cold air smelled like cinnamon from the bakery down the block. I was telling her about how my ex had been trying to paint herself as the victim around town, claiming I had neglected her, that she felt lonely, that her cheating was a mistake caused by emotional abandonment. A lie. All of it. Elena walked slowly, hands in her coat pockets, listening. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "She's rewriting history. That's what manipulators do when they lose control." "Yeah," I muttered, "and people believe her." "Some do," she corrected, "but only until they see evidence that contradicts the story." That word, evidence, stuck in my mind like a hook. She glanced at me sideways. "Do you know the most effective way to expose a liar?" "No." "Let them talk," she said. "Let them build their web. Then pull one thread, one undeniable truth. Everything collapses from there." I stopped walking. "You've done this before." She didn't deny it. That's when I felt it, a small shift in the air, a realization that Elena had lived through something similar. Betrayal. A narcissist. A manipulator. A liar. Something in her eyes hinted at scars deeper than mine. But she wasn't ready to tell me yet. Instead, she changed the subject. "Let's get you into shape," she said lightly. "What? For this revenge you're planning, you need confidence. You need presence. You need to look like someone she underestimated." Before I knew it, she was dragging me into a clothing store. Not a fancy one, just practical, good quality stuff. She tossed shirts at me, told me what colors worked with my eyes, what fit made me look stronger, more grounded. It wasn't about looks. It was about posture, self-respect, reclaiming the parts of myself that my ex had eroded. When I stepped out of the fitting room wearing a charcoal jacket Elena had picked, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "There," she said. "That's the man she thought she could break." Something tightened in my chest, but in a good way. A shift, a reset. We walked out into the night, bags in hand, silence between us thick with something unspoken. A new energy, a current pulling us closer. But just as we reached her car, my phone buzzed. A message from my ex: "We need to talk. ASAP." Elena glanced at the screen, then at me, and her voice softened into something protective, almost fierce. "She feels something slipping. Don't give her control. Whatever you do, don't go alone." I didn't know it then, but that message from my ex would be the trigger for the next stage of everything. My plan, her lies unraveling, and my deepening connection to the woman who was slowly becoming far more than an ally. By now, the tension in my life had reached a boiling point. I had been living in a fragile balance. On one hand, pretending that everything was normal. On the other, secretly watching her, analyzing her every move, learning every little habit and weakness. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. The betrayal had carved a hollow place inside me, and I was determined to fill it with something that mattered. Revenge, yes, but also control. I started small. A misplaced wallet here, a subtly lost phone there. Nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to unsettle her. She began to second-guess her own memory, her instincts, even her sanity. Watching her confusion grow gave me a quiet satisfaction, but I knew I had to escalate. This was no longer about petty annoyances. This was about teaching her a lesson she would never forget. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, a work trip she had been planning for weeks. "A business seminar," she said, but I knew better. I had a gut feeling she intended to meet him again. I couldn't risk confrontation. This had to be handled with precision. I spent nights preparing, reviewing schedules, memorizing the route she would take, considering every possible scenario. The day she left, I made sure she wouldn't notice me watching from the street outside her apartment. My heart raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration. This wasn't just revenge, it was strategy. The hours crawled as I waited, observing every text she sent, every call she made. And then it happened. He appeared. The man she thought she could trust, the one she believed she had control over. I didn't approach immediately. I let them talk, laugh, and linger in their false sense of security. Every moment fed the fire inside me. And then, when the timing was perfect, I acted. A small, discreet message sent to her friend in the city, a little tip about a surprise meeting at a nearby cafe. My message was vague, innocent-seeming, but enough to redirect events without revealing my involvement. The chaos that followed was exquisite. Their carefully choreographed day began to unravel. She grew frantic, calling him repeatedly, receiving delayed responses. He, in turn, seemed confused, unsure of what was going on. I watched it all unfold from a distance, invisible, untouched, yet completely orchestrating their discomfort. It wasn't cruelty for the sake of cruelty. No, it was a lesson. A demonstration that betrayal has consequences, even when it seems hidden behind lies and excuses. And as I observed her panic, a strange calm washed over me. The anger had evolved into something more profound, a sense of reclaiming my own life, asserting the power she had tried to take from me. By nightfall, she returned home, exhausted, frazzled, and slightly paranoid. I greeted her casually, asking about her trip, concealing every detail of my day's maneuvers behind a calm, almost charming exterior. She didn't notice the subtle shift in our dynamic, the underlying tension, the invisible boundaries I had quietly redrawn. In that moment, I realized that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about control, about reminding someone of the respect and attention they had taken for granted. And for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, not triumphant, not gloating, but a quiet, assured knowledge that I was no longer the one being deceived. But this was only the beginning. The following days were tense, yet oddly mundane. She tried to act normal, laughing a little too loudly, smiling in ways that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed every detail, the way she hesitated before opening messages, the slight tremor in her hands when she thought I wasn't looking. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I savored it. Every second of her discomfort was a quiet victory. I didn't confront her directly. That would have been too easy, too expected. No, this had to be a slow, consuming revelation, like a shadow creeping into every corner of her life. I began leaving small traces, notes that she would find, messages that seemed innocent but hinted at someone knowing too much, subtle reminders that her actions had consequences. One evening, she came home later than usual, her expression tense, her movements sharp. She muttered something about a complicated day, but I didn't press. Instead, I observed, silently noting the weight in her voice. That night, I replayed everything I had learned about her, every lie, every betrayal, every secret she thought was safe. It all became a blueprint, a map for the next stage. The plan wasn't about humiliation. It was about forcing her to confront the truth, about making her feel the uncertainty she had forced upon me. I carefully manipulated small situations, a missed appointment here, a confused encounter there, always subtle, never traceable. She started doubting herself, her instincts, even her relationships with friends. I watched from a distance, fascinated by how fragile her world had become. And then, the real test arrived. I arranged for a mutual friend to accidentally reveal a detail she hadn't shared. A meeting she had claimed was work-related, now suddenly public knowledge. Her reaction was immediate. Shock, panic, frantic attempts to explain. I could have stepped in, could have comforted her, but I didn't. This was her moment of reckoning, the moment when her carefully constructed lies began to crumble. I watched her face twist through disbelief, fear, and desperation. It was a masterclass in human behavior, a mixture of pride and fascination that I had never experienced before. For the first time, she realized that her actions had tangible consequences, and that the world around her was not as forgiving as she had assumed. Late that night, she confronted me, finally. Her eyes searched mine, looking for anger, for malice, for something she could understand. I stayed calm, measured, almost gentle. "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "I'm just awake now, and you need to understand what that feels like." Her silence spoke volumes. The weight of her guilt, her fear, her recognition of betrayal. It filled the room like a tangible force. And in that quiet, I realized the power of patience. Revenge, I had learned, was not a moment. It was a process, a careful orchestration of events that forces someone to truly feel the consequences of their choices. But even as I held that quiet power, I knew the story wasn't over. She had been shaken, yes, but she was resilient. And if I wanted her to fully understand, to truly see the magnitude of her actions, I had to go further. The next steps would require even more precision, more subtlety, and perhaps, the most difficult part of all, letting her think she might escape unscathed. Because the truth, once revealed, cannot be undone. The days that followed were a careful dance, a game of patience and observation. She moved through our home with a cautious grace, as if every creak of the floorboards might expose her secrets. I maintained my calm, my demeanor unchanged, even as I meticulously orchestrated small reminders of her betrayal. Each note, each accidental discovery, was calculated to keep her on edge, never breaking her, but ensuring she understood that nothing was hidden. I noticed the subtle changes first, the way she checked her phone before leaving the room, the hesitation in her speech, the forced calm in her eyes. Every gesture was a confession, even when unspoken. I found it fascinating how someone so confident could unravel when confronted with the invisible weight of consequences. Then came the perfect opportunity, a community event in our small town, something she had insisted on attending. I knew it would be the ideal stage. She believed she was in control, mingling with neighbors and friends, appearing cheerful and composed. But I had arranged for someone to casually mention a detail only I and she knew, a subtle hint that would ignite suspicion. It worked flawlessly. Her laughter faltered, her smile tightened, and her eyes darted toward me, searching for reassurance. I offered nothing. I let her sit with the unease, the doubt, the creeping panic that she could no longer control the narrative. Watching her grapple with the uncertainty was both painful and satisfying, a reminder that the consequences of betrayal do not fade quietly. They build, layer upon layer, until they cannot be ignored. Back home that evening, she tried to talk, to explain, to justify. I listened, nodding occasionally, letting her spill her fears and regrets. But I said nothing of significance. Words were unnecessary. The lesson was already sinking in. The tension between us was thick, almost tangible, and in that silence, I could see her realization taking hold. Over the next few days, our interactions became a careful study in restraint. I allowed small moments of normalcy, shared meals, casual conversations, but always with an undercurrent of awareness. She was learning, slowly, that trust is not a gift to be taken lightly, and that actions have consequences beyond immediate perception. Then came the moment that would define everything. A private conversation, away from the eyes of the town, where she finally confronted the truth of her choices. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with vulnerability. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I saw genuine remorse, fear, and understanding. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could have both the excitement and us. I looked at her calmly, letting the weight of her confession settle. It wasn't just about us, I said. It was about respect, about understanding that every action carries consequences. You wanted a lesson, I'm showing you one. Her tears came quietly, not theatrically, but as a recognition of the truth she had avoided. And in that moment, I realized that revenge had evolved. It was no longer about punishment. It was about awakening, forcing her to confront her choices in a way that words alone could never achieve. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't vindictive. It was the relief of reclaiming balance, of restoring an equilibrium that had been broken. But even as we sat there, the shadow of betrayal lingered, a reminder that trust, once broken, is fragile and must be rebuilt carefully or risk shattering forever. And I knew rebuilding would be the next, even greater challenge. The tension between us had transformed into a strange, fragile truce. She moved cautiously, her every gesture measured, her every word carefully chosen. I, in turn, remained outwardly composed, observing, calculating, making sure that the lessons she had been forced to learn were not forgotten. The air between us was thick with unspoken truths, each silence weighted with meaning. I began to test her, not cruelly, but deliberately. Small decisions, subtle choices. Would she act with honesty this time? Would she be mindful of the consequences? Every interaction became a gauge of her awareness, a way to measure whether the seed of understanding had truly taken root. And slowly, I began to see change. She no longer attempted to manipulate situations or hide things from me. Her eyes, once defiant, now held caution, humility, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Yet there remained a tension, a quiet unease, as if she were still walking on a tightrope above the chasm of her past betrayal. One evening, she approached me while I was reading in the living room. Her voice was soft, tentative. I want to try again. Not just with us, but with myself. I need to earn back trust. I set the book down slowly, studying her. The sincerity in her expression was unmistakable, but I knew that words alone were not enough. Actions would speak louder, and she had yet to prove herself through consistent, conscious effort. Trust isn't given back easily, I said quietly. It's rebuilt, brick by brick. You have to show me every day that you've learned. She nodded, understanding the gravity of my words. And in that acknowledgement, there was a subtle relief, a hint of hope, both for her redemption and for the possibility of restoring what had been broken. The following weeks were a study in patience and vigilance. She made small but meaningful gestures, honesty in situations that would have previously called for deception, thoughtfulness in moments that once seemed inconsequential, and careful attention to the needs and boundaries of our relationship. Each act was a brick in the rebuilding of trust, a visible sign that the person I had loved was returning, not exactly the same, but reshaped by experience. Yet the shadow of the past remained, a constant reminder that betrayal leaves scars that do not fully heal. It was present in her cautious smiles, in the pauses before she spoke, in the quiet hesitations that punctuated our interactions. And I, too, had changed. My patience had deepened, my understanding had sharpened, and my awareness of human fragility had grown. One night, we sat together in the living room, the silence between us no longer oppressive, but contemplative. She looked at me with eyes that reflected both regret and hope. "I know it's going to take time," she said softly. I want to be better. For you, and for us." I reached out, taking her hand, not with anger or accusation, but with the quiet acknowledgement that while the past could not be erased, the future was still ours to shape. "Time will tell," I replied. "But this is a start." And in that moment, I realized that the lesson of betrayal and revenge was not about vengeance. It was about awareness, growth, and the painstaking journey of rebuilding trust once it had been shattered. The final act was not yet written, but the possibility of redemption had begun to emerge from the shadows. Weeks turned into months, and the fragile balance we had painstakingly rebuilt began to solidify. She no longer moved with hesitation, though the memory of past mistakes lingered in her eyes, a quiet reminder of what had been lost and learned. Our home, once tense with suspicion and unspoken accusations, now carried a cautious peace. I watched her carefully, not with distrust, but with awareness. Trust, once broken, cannot be forgotten. It can only be rebuilt, day by day, choice by choice. She was learning, truly learning, that actions speak far louder than words, and that honesty and respect are not negotiable. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat beside me on the couch. There was a calmness in her demeanor, a subtle confidence that had not been there before. "I never realized how much pain I caused," she admitted quietly, "and how much I took for granted. I want to keep making it right, not just for us, but for myself." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering caution. "Redemption isn't instant," I replied. "It's something you earn, not once, but continuously. Every day, with every decision." She smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in months, there was no tension, no fear, just an understanding that our relationship had evolved. The betrayal had left scars, yes, but it had also opened a path toward deeper awareness, greater empathy, and a renewed connection. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, the final acknowledgement that our shared pain had transformed into something meaningful. "I know I can never erase the past," she said, taking my hand. "But I can choose to be better and to honor what we have now." I squeezed her hand gently, understanding the depth of her words. It was the culmination of everything: the betrayal, the calculated steps of revenge, the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust. The lessons had been hard, the process painstaking, but the outcome was a relationship tempered by experience and strengthened by understanding. We sat in silence for a while, the quiet between us no longer heavy, but reflective. I realized then that revenge, when guided by purpose and patience, is not about cruelty. It is about reclaiming agency, restoring balance, and teaching awareness. The satisfaction I felt was not vindictive. It was the quiet reassurance that justice, in its most personal and precise form, had been served. But more importantly, the story did not end with punishment or retribution. It ended with growth. The woman I loved had been transformed by her choices, and I had been transformed by the process of watching, waiting, and guiding. We were not perfect, and perhaps we never would be, but we were conscious, aware, and connected in a way that would have been impossible without the storm we had endured. As we looked at each other, a sense of cautious hope filled the room. The betrayal had been painful, the revenge meticulous, but now there was clarity. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not with words alone, but with understanding, patience, and the unwavering recognition of consequences. And in that recognition, there was peace. The past could not be changed, but the future was ours to shape.